He told her she was worthless. He told her she was lucky he even looked at her. Benedict Sterling, the steel magnate of New York, thought his quiet wife, Genevieve, was nothing more than a charity case he picked up in Europe, a woman with no family, no money, and no voice. He treated her like a ghost in his own home. But Benedict made one fatal calculation. He never checked her birth certificate. He didn't know that the woman scrubbing his floor was the same woman whom kings bow to. Watch what happens when the most arrogant billionaire in Manhattan realizes his nobody wife outranks his entire existence. You won't believe the look on his face. The air in the penthouse atop the Steinway Tower was always cold, regardless of the season. It was a coldness curated by Benedict Sterling, a man who believed that warmth was a sign of inefficiency. Genevieve stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at Central Park, which appeared like a dark, rectangular bruise against the glowing city grid. She adjusted the strap of her watch, a simple, battered leather thing that looked absurdly out of place against her silk gown. "Take it off," a voice snapped from the doorway. Genevieve didn't flinch. She turned slowly. Benedict was standing there, adjusting his cufflinks. They were diamond-encrusted, shaped like lions. He was a handsome man in the way a shark is handsome, sleek, sharp, and entirely devoid of mercy. "The watch, Genevieve," Benedict sighed, walking over to the wet bar to pour himself a scotch. "We are going to the Met Gala. The press will be there. The board of directors for Sterling Steel will be there. I will not have my wife wearing a piece of leather trash that looks like it was chewed on by a stray dog." "It was my father's," Genevieve said softly. Her voice was low, melodic, and rarely used. In the 3 years of their marriage, she had perhaps spoken a total of 5,000 words to him. "Your father was a nobody," Benedict replied, taking a sip of the amber liquid. "A farmer? A mechanic? I forget which sob story you told me when I found you waiting tables in that damp little cafe in Brussels. It doesn't matter. What matters is that tonight you are Mrs. Sterling. Try to look the part, and for God's sake, don't speak unless someone asks you a direct question. Your accent, it confuses people. It sounds rural." It didn't sound rural. It sounded aristocratic High German, mixed with the clipped precision of the Swiss courts, but Benedict didn't have the ear for that. To him, anything that wasn't American money sounded like poverty. Genevieve undid the clasp of the watch. She placed it gently on the marble side table. "As you wish, Benedict." "Good." He walked over, grabbing her chin with his thumb and forefinger, tilting her head up. He inspected her face like one might inspect a used car for scratches. "You're wearing too much blush. You look flushed. Fix it. I want you pale, silent, statuesque, like the marble in the lobby." He dropped her chin and checked his phone. "Victoria is meeting us there. She's bringing Candace." Genevieve felt a cold spike in her chest. "Candace is coming to the gala." "Candace is the head of PR for my European division," Benedict said, checking his reflection in the window. "She needs to be there. Stop being jealous, Genevieve. It's pathetic. Candace is a professional. She has a degree from Wharton. She has pedigree. You have me," he laughed, a short, barking sound. "You should be thanking me every day. If I hadn't married you, where would you be? Still serving croissants to tourists in Belgium? Rotting in some village?" "I was happy in the village," Genevieve whispered. "Happiness is for poor people who can't afford ambition," Benedict sneered. "Now fix your face. The car is downstairs. Don't make me wait." He stormed out, the heavy oak door slamming shut behind him. Genevieve stood alone in the silence. She looked at the old leather watch on the table. She picked it up and turned it over. On the back, worn smooth by time, was an engraving in Latin. "Non ducor, duco, I am not led, I lead." She kissed the watch, slipped it into her clutch purse where Benedict couldn't see it, and walked to the mirror. She wiped the blush from her cheeks until she looked as pale and cold as the marble he loved so much. "Playing the role," she whispered to her reflection. "Just a little longer." The Metropolitan Museum of Art was a fortress of flashbulbs. The red carpet was less a walkway and more a gladiatorial arena where worth was measured in camera clicks. When Benedict stepped out of the black Maybach, the screaming started. "Mr. Sterling, over here! Benedict, who are you wearing?" He waved, that practiced, magnanimous wave of a man who owned the steel that built the skyscrapers around them. He reached back and pulled Genevieve out of the car. She stumbled slightly on her hem. "Steady, you clumsy idiot," he hissed through a frozen smile, waving at the cameras. "Smile. Show teeth." Genevieve smiled. It was tight, controlled. She moved to his left, the traditional spot, but was immediately body-checked aside. "Benny, darling!" Candice Vance swept in. She was wearing a dress that was essentially red spray paint and diamonds. She was loud, blonde, and possessed the kind of confidence that comes from never having been told no in 30 years. She latched onto Benedict's arm, effectively pushing Genevieve behind them. "Candice," Benedict beamed, his eyes lighting up in a way they never did for his wife. "You look stunning." "I try, for the brand," Candice winked. She glanced back at Genevieve. "Oh, hello, General Cute Dress. Is that off the rack?" "It's vintage," Genevieve said quietly. "Vintage means used, sweetie," Candice laughed, turning back to the cameras. The photographers went wild for Benedict and Candice. They looked like the power couple of the century. Genevieve stood 2 feet behind them, looking like a confused assistant holding a purse. "Mr. Sterling, Mr. Sterling, is it true Sterling Steel is acquiring the Luxembourg Heavy Industries?" a reporter from the Wall Street Journal shouted. Benedict stopped. He loved talking business. "We are in talks, but the Europeans, they are difficult, stuck in their old ways. They need American efficiency." "Actually," Genevieve said. The noise of the crowd seemed to dampen instantly. She hadn't meant to speak, but the inaccuracy irked her. "The Luxembourg deal is stalled because of Article 15 of the Grand Duchy's Environmental Accords. It's not about efficiency. It's about heritage zoning." Benedict whipped his head around. The look in his eyes was murderous. Candice let out a high-pitched, mocking giggle. "Oh, listen to her!" Candice shrieked. "She reads the newspapers. Benny, your little charity case thinks she understands international law. That is adorable." Benedict grabbed Genevieve's upper arm, his fingers digging into the soft flesh. He pulled her close, whispering into her ear with venomous heat. "Shut your mouth! You embarrassed me. You think because you read a headline you know business? You are a waitress. You are nothing. Go inside, go to the table, and do not speak to a single soul until I tell you to." He shoved her gently, just gently enough that the cameras wouldn't catch it as abuse, but hard enough that she lost her balance. "Go," he commanded. Genevieve righted herself. She looked at Benedict, then at Candice, who was smirking with triumphant malice. "As you wish," Genevieve said. She walked up the grand stairs alone. As she reached the top, her phone, a secure, encrypted device she kept hidden in the lining of her clutch, vibrated. She pulled it out. A text message. Sender, the Grey House. Message, Protocol 7 is active. The principal is in the city. He requests audience. He has seen the live feed. He is not pleased with the subject's behavior. Genevieve typed back quickly. Hold position. Not yet. Let him dig the grave deeper. She entered the great hall. The gala was in full swing. At the Sterling Steel table, table 1, naturally, sat Benedict's mother, Victoria Sterling. Victoria was a woman made of wires and hairspray. She held a martini glass like a weapon. When Genevieve sat down, Victoria didn't even look up. "You're late," Victoria said, "and you look like a ghost. Did Benedict scold you? Good. You probably deserved it. I saw the arrival on my phone. Why were you standing so far away? You made him look like a bachelor. Do you have any idea how bad that is for stock prices?" Candice was enthusiastic, Genevieve murmured, placing her napkin on her lap. "Candice is a go-getter," Victoria snapped. "She's a Vance. Her father owns half of Connecticut. If Benedict had married her, we'd have a merger, not a dependent. Victoria leaned in, her eyes narrowing. I've booked you an appointment tomorrow with Dr. Halloway. A doctor? I'm not ill, Victoria. A plastic surgeon, Victoria corrected. Your nose. It's too distinct, aristocratic maybe, but in a foreign way. We need you to look more American, more approachable. Halloway can shave the bridge down. Benedict agrees. Genevieve felt her stomach turn. Her nose was the same as her grandmother's, a woman who had defied the Nazis in 1940. I will not change my face. Victoria slammed her drink down. You will do what you are told. You are a sterling by marriage, and barely that. You bring nothing to this table but your silence, and lately, you can't even manage that. Just then, Benedict and Candace arrived at the table, laughing. Benedict pulled out a chair for Candace, not his wife. What a night, Benedict crowed. I just spoke to the senator. He's loving the new merger idea. He glanced at Genevieve. Still here? Good. Try not to eat too much. The dress is straining at the seams. It wasn't. The dress was tailored to perfection. A waiter approached the table. He was holding a silver tray with a single thick cream envelope on it. It was sealed with heavy red wax, stamped with a crest, a double-headed eagle clutching a sword and an olive branch. Mr. Sterling, the waiter said, looking nervous. This was just delivered by a private courier. He insisted it be brought to the table immediately. Security tried to stop him, but the waiter trailed off, looking pale. He had diplomatic credentials. Benedict puffed up his chest. Diplomatic credentials must be the Luxembourg delegation finally coming to their senses. They know who runs the show. He grabbed the envelope. See, Genevieve, this is what power looks like. They come to me. He tore open the envelope, destroying the wax seal. He pulled out the card. His brow furrowed. He turned the card over. He looked confused. What is it, Benny? Candace asked, leaning over his shoulder. It's nonsense, Benedict muttered. It's written in Latin and French. He tossed the card onto the table, landing right in front of Genevieve. Some prank, Benedict scoffed. Or some pretentious invite to an opera? Genevieve looked down at the card. Her heart stopped. It wasn't an invitation. The text was in the script of the Royal Chancery. To the high seat, the lion is awake. The guards are at the gate. We await your command to dissolve the masquerade. It was signed by General Alistair Thorne, commander of the Royal Obsessive Guard. And at the very bottom, in tiny gold print, was a name. Not Benedict Sterling. It was addressed to Her Serene Highness, Princess Genevieve of Valois-Dompierre. Benedict hadn't even read the name at the bottom. He was too busy laughing at the pretentious font. Throw it away, Benedict waved his hand. Genevieve reached out her hand, her fingers trembling slightly, and covered the card. I'll take care of it, she said. Finally, Benedict sneered. You're useful for cleaning up trash. Genevieve slipped the card into her purse, next to the watch. She looked at her husband. Really looked at him. For the first time in years, not as a wife, but as a ruler looking at a peasant who had forgotten his place. The dinner service was a blur of lobster thermidor and malicious gossip. Benedict ignored Genevieve entirely, spending the meal whispering into Candace's ear and laughing at private jokes. Genevieve ate nothing. She sat with her back straight, her hands folded in her lap, watching the room with the detached observation of a hawk on a wire. Midway through dessert, the lights in the great hall dimmed. The charity auction was beginning. Benedict wiped his mouth with a linen napkin and stood up. He adjusted his tuxedo jacket, checking his reflection in a silver spoon. Watch this, he told Candace, loud enough for half the table to hear. I'm going to make a splash. The board needs to see I'm not afraid to shed dead weight. He walked to the stage, taking the microphone from the auctioneer. The crowd applauded. Benedict Sterling was money, and money always got a round of applause. Ladies and gentlemen, Benedict boomed, his voice echoing off the Temple of Dendur. Tonight is about charity. It's about helping the less fortunate, and God knows I have experience with that." A ripple of polite laughter went through the room. 3 years ago, Benedict continued, pacing the stage, I was in Europe. I found a young woman working in a cafe. She had nothing. No family, no money, holes in her shoes. I took her in. I gave her a home, a name, and a life she could never have dreamed of. He pointed a finger down at table 1. A spotlight swung around, blinding Genevieve. "Stand up, Genevieve," he commanded. She didn't move. "I said stand up." Benedict laughed, playing it off as a joke, but his eyes were hard. Slowly, Genevieve stood. The spotlight burned her skin. She felt thousands of eyes on her, pitying, mocking, indifferent. "Look at her," Benedict said, spreading his arms. "Proof that American generosity can fix anything. But," he paused for dramatic effect, "even the best projects have an expiration date. Sometimes, for a business to grow, you have to cut the assets that aren't performing." The room went deadly silent. This wasn't a charity speech anymore. This was a public flaying. Benedict reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. "Tonight, I am donating $1 million to the museum," Benedict announced. "But I am also making a personal announcement. As of this evening, I am filing for divorce." The crowd gasped. Flashbulbs erupted like a lightning storm. Benedict gestured to Candace, who was beaming at the table, feigning shock but clearly delighted. "I am thrilled to announce the merger of the Sterling and Vance families," Benedict shouted over the noise. "Candace and I will be married in the spring. We are building a legacy of equals. No more charity cases." He looked down at Genevieve, his face twisted in a triumphant sneer. "Genevieve, you'll be provided with a generous severance package, a condo in Queens, and a monthly stipend. Consider it a pension for your service. You're free to go back to whatever village I plucked you from." Victoria Sterling clapped slowly. Candace blew him a kiss. Genevieve stood in the spotlight. For a moment she looked small, fragile. The crowd waited for the tears. They waited for her to run out of the room, sobbing. That's what rejected wives did. They broke. But Genevieve didn't break. She reached into a clutch. She didn't take out a tissue. She took out the heavy, gold-engraved card she had received earlier. She walked towards the stage. "Oh, look," Benedict laughed into the mic. "She wants to say thank you. Come on up, darling. Say your piece." Genevieve ascended the stairs. She moved with a strange, fluid grace that Benedict had never noticed before. She didn't walk like a waitress. She walked like she owned the floorboards. She took the microphone from his hand. He let her take it, smirking at Candace. Genevieve looked out at the sea of faces. She didn't look at Benedict. "You speak of charity, Benedict," she said. Her voice was calm, amplified through the hall. It wasn't the whisper he was used to. It was resonant, commanding. "You speak of value. You speak of pedigree." She turned to him. The look in her eyes stopped his smile cold. It was a look of absolute, freezing boredom. "You offered me a condo in Queens," she said. "That is very kind. But I already have a home." "Oh?" Benedict mocked, leaning in. "Where? Under a bridge in Brussels?" "No," Genevieve said softly. "The Winter Palace in Valois, the Chateau of the Three Lions, and the sovereign state of Dampierre." Benedict frowned. "What are you babbling about? You're drunk." "I am not drunk, Benedict. I am disappointed." She dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a deafening thud. At that exact second, the heavy double doors at the back of the Metropolitan Museum, the doors reserved for heads of state and emergency exits, blew open. The sound was not an explosion, but it was just as shocking. It was the sound of synchronized percussion. Slam, click, slam, click. 30 men marched into the great hall. They were not wearing the blazers of private security. They were not NYPD. They were dressed in dress blues that looked like they belonged in a history book, but the assault rifles strapped to their chests were very modern. They wore midnight blue tunics with gold braiding, crimson sashes, and polished knee-high boots. On their heads were berets with a distinct insignia, a golden lion weeping a tear of blood. The Royal Guard of Valois-Dampierre, the most elite secretive protection detail in Europe. The crowd parted instantly. Screams were stifled in throats. These men moved with a terrifying, fluid violence. They didn't look at the guests. They looked at threats. "What is this?" Benedict shouted, stepping to the edge of the stage. "Security! Get these clowns out of here. This is a private event." The leader of the unit kept walking. He was a giant of a man, grey-haired, with a scar running down his cheek. This was General Alistair. He walked straight down the center aisle, his boots cracking against the marble. 2 security guards from the museum tried to step in front of him. General Alistair didn't even slow down. He simply extended a gloved hand and shoved the first guard aside, with enough force to send him sliding 10 feet across the floor. The second guard wisely backed away. "I said stop!" Benedict yelled, his voice cracking. "Do you know who I am? I am Benedict Sterling." The soldiers reached the stage. In seconds, they fanned out. 12 of them turned their backs to the stage, facing the crowd, their rifles held at the low ready. They created a wall of steel and flesh between the audience and the woman in the cheap dress. General Alistair walked up the stairs. He ignored Benedict completely. He walked past the billionaire as if he were a piece of furniture. He stopped in front of Genevieve. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. The general, a man who looked like he chewed granite for breakfast, fell to one knee. He bowed his head low, removing his beret and placing it over his heart. "Your Highness," Alistair said. His voice was a deep rumble that carried without a microphone. "We have secured the perimeter. The airspace above the museum is locked down. The royal yacht is docked in the Hudson." Benedict stood frozen, his mouth opened and closed like a fish. "Highness?" General Alistair stayed on one knee. "We apologize for the delay, ma'am. The diplomatic channels with the United States took convincing." But the king insisted. "The king?" Genevieve asked softly. "Your father," Alistair said. "His Majesty, King Henri VI. He has awakened from his coma, Your Highness. He is asking for you. The Regency Council is dissolved." Genevieve let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for 3 years. "He is awake?" "Yes, ma'am. And he has restored your titles. You are no longer Genevieve the Exile. You are Crown Princess Genevieve of Valois-Dampierre, Duchess of the Northern Reach, and Commander of the Order of the Falcon." Alistair looked up, his eyes wet with emotion. "It is time to go home, ma'am." Genevieve nodded. She looked at the general. "Rise, Alistair." The general stood. He turned sharply to face Benedict. Benedict was trembling. He looked at the soldiers, then at Genevieve, then back to the general. This is a joke," Benedict stammered. "She's a waitress. I found her in a cafe. She didn't even have a passport." "She had a diplomatic immunity seal," Alistair said, his voice dripping with contempt, "which you would have known if you bothered to look past your own ego." "But I'm her husband," Benedict tried to regain his footing, puffing his chest out. "I own her. I mean, we are married. By law. That makes me a prince." Alistair smiled. It was a terrifying expression. "In Valois," the general said calmly, his hand resting on the hilt of the ceremonial saber at his hip. "A commoner who lays hands on the royal blood without permission loses the hand. A commoner who insults the royal heir loses his tongue." Benedict instinctively covered his mouth. "However," Alistair continued, "we are in America, so I cannot execute you." He sounded genuinely disappointed about this fact. "But Mr. Sterling, you are no prince. By the laws of our succession, a marriage to a royal that is not approved by the crown is considered morganatic and void. You are not her husband. You are..." An unfortunate error in her biography. Genevieve stepped forward. She placed a hand on Alistair's arm to silence him. She looked at Benedict. He looked small now, shrunken. The arrogance had drained out of him, leaving only a sweaty, terrified man in a tuxedo. "Benedict," she said. "General." "Genevieve," he stuttered. "Look, honey, I didn't mean the divorce thing. It was a business tactic. Negotiation. We can talk about this. If you're a princess, think of the merger. Sterling Steel and whatever country you own. We could rule the market." From the table below, Candace Vance stood up. She looked furious. "Benedict, what are you doing? She's lying. Look at her shoes. Princesses don't wear leather like that." Genevieve looked down at Candace. "These shoes," Genevieve said, her voice cutting through the air, "were made by the royal cobbler of Valois. The leather is from the stag my grandfather hunted. They are worth more than your entire portfolio, Miss Vance." She turned back to Benedict. "You wanted a divorce, Benedict. You served me verbally in front of your friends." She reached out and took the diamond ring off her finger. It was a large, gaudy rock that Benedict had picked out himself. "You said I was an investment that didn't perform." She held the ring over the edge of the stage. "No, don't." Benedict lunged. She dropped it. It bounced on the floor and rolled under a table. "Consider the contract void," she said. "General," Genevieve commanded, turning away, "get me out of this place. It smells of cheap cologne and desperation." "Yes, Your Highness," Alistair barked. He signaled his men. "Form up! The package is moving! Clear the hall!" The soldiers snapped into a phalanx formation around Genevieve. They began to move her towards the exit. "Wait!" Benedict screamed. He ran forward, grabbing Genevieve's arm. "You can't just leave! I made you!" The reaction was instantaneous. Before Genevieve could flinch, General Alistair spun around. He didn't use his gun. He used the back of his hand. Crack! The sound echoed like a gunshot. Benedict Sterling, the man of steel, was lifted off his feet. He spun in the air and crashed onto the stage, blood spraying from his lip. The entire Met Gala gasped. General Alistair stood over him, adjusting his white glove. "Touch Her Highness again," Alistair whispered, "and I will start an international incident that ends with your funeral." Benedict lay on the floor, dazed, looking up at the ceiling. Genevieve stopped. She looked back at him one last time. "Goodbye, Benedict," she said. "I hope you enjoy the condo in Queens. I hear the view is humbling." She turned and walked out, surrounded by her steel wall, leaving the billionaire bleeding on the stage while the cameras flashed, capturing the end of his empire and the rise of hers. The silence in the back of the armored limousine was absolute, a stark contrast to the cacophony of the Met Gala. Genevieve, no, Her Highness, sat on the plush leather seat. She didn't look back as the lights of the museum faded into the distance. General Alistair sat opposite her, his rifle now stowed, his demeanor shifting from warrior to confident. He opened a small, refrigerated compartment and poured a glass of sparkling water, not champagne. He knew she hated champagne. It reminded her too much of the meaningless toasts Benedict loved to make. "The extraction was messy, Your Highness," Alistair said, handing her the glass. "I apologize for the theatricality, but the paparazzi, they are like jackals." "It was necessary, Alistair," Genevieve said, her voice steady. She took a sip. "And please, tell the men to stand down. We are not in a war zone. We are on Fifth Avenue." "With respect, ma'am," Alistair replied, checking a monitor built into the console. "To us, anywhere you are is a potential war zone until you are back on Valois soil." "Your uncle, the Duke of Oakhaven, he is still at large. He is the reason you had to hide in the first place." Genevieve looked out the tinted window. The memories of 3 years ago flooded back. The accident that had put her father in a coma. The whispered warnings from the palace guard that she was next. The hasty flight to Brussels with nothing but cash and a fake identity. The fear. And then Benedict. She had thought Benedict was her savior. He was American, brash, powerful. She thought he could protect her without even knowing who she was. She had fallen in love with his strength, only to realize too late that his strength was nothing more than fragility wrapped in money. "Does Benedict know about my uncle?" she asked. "Mr. Sterling knows nothing," Alastair scoffed. "We ran a background check on him the moment you married him. The man reads nothing but stock tickers and his own press releases. He has no idea that the Luxembourg heavy industries deal he is so desperate for is actually a subsidiary of the Royal Crown estate." Genevieve's eyes widened. A slow, cold smile spread across her face. "Wait, the steel acquisition? The one he needs to save the company from bankruptcy next quarter?" "The very same," Alastair nodded. "He has been negotiating with a shell company. The ultimate signatory is the Crown. Specifically, you." Genevieve laughed. It was a dark, rich sound. "So my husband spent 3 years calling me worthless while unknowingly begging my company for salvation?" "Precisely, ma'am." The limousine slowed. They had reached the Chelsea piers. Waiting at the end of the dock was not a boat, but a floating palace. The Iron Sovereign, the royal yacht of Valois-Dompierre, was 300 feet of sleek, grey hull and military-grade radar domes. It looked less like a pleasure craft and more like a destroyer that had put on a tuxedo. As Genevieve stepped out of the car, the crew, 50 men and women in crisp white uniforms, snapped to attention. A bosun's whistle piped the arrival. She walked up the gangplank. She didn't stumble. She didn't look down. She ascended. Meanwhile, back at the Met, the world was ending for Benedict Sterling. He was sitting in the green room, holding a bag of ice to his bleeding lip. The gala organizers had shoved him in there to stop him from making a scene, but the damage was done. Candice was pacing the room, furiously typing on her phone. "My publicist just quit!" she screamed, throwing a pillow at the wall. "Twitter is trending #Princess Genevieve. They're saying you abused a royal. Do you know what this does to my brand, Benedict? I'm supposed to be the face of modern elegance, not the mistress of a wife-beater." "I didn't beat her," Benedict mumbled, the ice pack muffling his voice. I coached her. I made her better, and she humiliated me." "She owns a country, you moron," Candice yelled. "I just Googled it. Valois-Dompierre. It's a sovereign principality between France and Belgium. They have a GDP higher than Switzerland. They bankroll half the European Union's tech sector." Benedict sat up, wincing. So what? I have lawyers. We have a prenup. She can't touch my money." "She doesn't want your money, Benedict," Candice shrieked. "She has old money. You have 'I built a skyscraper' money. She has 'my face is on the currency' money. There is a difference." Benedict stood up, straightening his torn jacket. "I'm going to the office. Call the legal team. We're filing for an annulment based on fraud. She lied about her identity. That's fraud." "I'm not calling anyone," Candice said, stopping her pacing. She looked at him with cold calculation. "What?" "I'm leaving, Benny," she said, grabbing her purse. "Leaving?" "But the merger. The engagement." "There is no engagement," Candice sneered. "I date winners. Tonight, you became the biggest loser in New York history. If I stay with you, I'm social suicide. Goodbye." She walked out, leaving the door open. Flashbulbs went off in the hallway as she exited, capturing Benedict standing alone, holding a bag of melting ice, surrounded by the wreckage of his own ego. The next morning, the sun rose over Manhattan, but it didn't shine on the Sterling steel tower. The building seemed wrapped in a grey fog of impending doom. Benedict hadn't slept. He had gone straight to his office on the 40th floor, trying to get ahead of the story. But the story was faster than him. At 7 a.m., the New York Stock Exchange opened. At 7:01 a.m., Sterling Steel, STS, dropped 14%. Benedict sat at his massive mahogany desk, staring at the Bloomberg terminal. The red line was plummeting like a stone dropped down a well. "Get me the Luxembourg delegation," Benedict barked into his intercom. "Now! If we close the European deal, the stock stabilizes. Tell them I'm ready to sign whatever they want," his secretary, Mrs. Higgins, answered. Her voice was trembling. "Mr. Sterling, I can't." What do you mean you can't? Dial the number. They are here, sir. Here, in the building? Benedict stood up, hope surging in his chest. Fantastic. They came to me. Show them in. Get coffee. Get the good scotch. Sir, Mrs. Higgins whispered, they aren't alone. The doors to his office swung open. It wasn't the polite, bespectacled bankers from Luxembourg he was expecting. General Alistair Thorne walked in. He was wearing a grey business suit now, but he still looked like he could kill a man with a stapler. Behind him were 3 severe-looking men carrying leather briefcases stamped with the royal crest, and behind them was Genevieve. She was wearing a white power suit that cost more than Benedict's car. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. She didn't look like the woman who used to scrub his floors. She looked like the CEO of a nation. Genevieve, Benedict breathed. He tried to put on his best smile. Honey, I knew you'd come back. Look, things got heated last night, but we can fix this. I'm willing to forgive the deception. Genevieve ignored him. She sat down in the chair opposite his desk, the chair he usually made subordinates sit in. She crossed her legs. Mr. Sterling, one of the men with the briefcases said, I am Henri Dumont, royal solicitor for the Crown. We are not here to discuss your marriage. That has already been dissolved by royal decree this morning. You can't do that, Benedict sputtered. This is America. We are here to discuss business, Dumont continued, ignoring the outburst, specifically the acquisition of the Ardent Creek steel mills in Luxembourg. Yes. Benedict slammed his hand on the desk. The deal. I need that deal. If you sign it, Genevieve, I'll give you whatever alimony you want. Just sign the papers. Genevieve leaned forward. She picked up a Newton's cradle from his desk and clicked the silver balls back and forth. Click, clack, click, clack. You seem to be under a misunderstanding, Benedict, she said softly. You think you are the buyer. What? Sterling Steel has been leveraged 40-1 to finance this expansion, Genevieve said, reciting the numbers from memory. You used your personal shares as collateral. If the stock price drops below $12 a share, the bank calls the loan. You go bankrupt, effectively immediately. Benedict paled. How do you know that? I read your files while I was cleaning your office, she said simply. You really should lock your drawers. She looked at the screen. The stock is currently at $11.50. Benedict scrambled to the computer. It was true. The freefall was catastrophic. You did this, he accused her. The market did this, she corrected, because the market hates uncertainty, and knowing that the CEO of a steel company is at war with the primary supplier of European iron ore, that creates uncertainty. You're blocking the iron, Benedict gasped. I am the iron, Genevieve said coldly. The mines in the Ardennes belong to my family. Did you think I would let you buy them? She stood up. However, she said, smoothing her jacket, I am not cruel. I do not wish to see thousands of your employees lose their jobs just because their boss is a fool. So, I have a counter-offer. Dumont slid a single piece of paper across the desk. Valois Dampierre Sovereign Wealth Fund offers to purchase 51% of Sterling Steel, Genevieve stated. 51%! That's a hostile takeover, Benedict screamed. It's my company. My name is on the building. The price is $15 a share, Genevieve said. It's a premium. It saves the company. It saves your employees. And me? Benedict asked, his voice shaking. What about me? You, Genevieve smiled, will remain as a figurehead, a consultant, non-voting, non-executive. You will keep your office. You will keep your title. But you will not sign a single check, hire a single person, or make a single decision without my approval. Benedict stared at the paper. It was a surrender treaty, and if I refuse, then I walk out that door, Genevieve said. I announce that Valois Dampierre is placing a total embargo on Sterling Steel. The stock hits zero by lunch. You lose the penthouse, you lose the car, you lose everything, and you go to prison for fraud because I also found the offshore accounts you were hiding from the IRS. The room went silent. The only sound was the click-clack of the Newton's cradle. Benedict looked at General Alistair, whose hand was hovering near his jacket pocket. He looked at the lawyers. He looked at his wife. He realized, for the first time, that he had never actually known her. He had married a reflection of his own ego, and now the mirror had shattered, revealing the wolf behind it. "Where do I sign?" Benedict whispered. Genevieve pointed to the bottom line. Benedict took his gold pen, the one he had used to sign so many ruthless deals, and signed away his empire. "Good," Genevieve said, snatching the paper before the ink was dry. She walked to the door. "Oh, one last thing," she said, pausing with her hand on the brass handle. "What?" Benedict asked, head in his hands. "The penthouse," she said. "It's company property, isn't it?" "Technically, yes." "Excellent. The new majority shareholder requires it for accommodation while in the city." Benedict looked up, horror in his eyes. "You're evicting me?" "I'm sure you can find something," she said, her eyes twinkling with a dangerous light. "I hear Queens is lovely this time of year, just like you suggested." She opened the door. "And Benedict?" "What?" he croaked. "Clean the place up before you leave. I want it spotless. I know how much you value a clean home." She walked out. General Alistair followed, stopping only to give Benedict a mock salute. Benedict Sterling sat alone in the office that was no longer his, in the building he no longer owned, listening to the sound of his ex-wife's heels clicking down the hallway like the ticking of a bomb that had finally gone off. The rain in New York City that morning did not cleanse. It merely suppressed. It was a cold, grey drizzle that seemed to seep into the very marrow of the city, turning the vibrant canyons of steel and glass into somber, mist-shrouded monoliths. For Benedict Sterling, standing on the sidewalk of 57th Street, the weather was the least of his concerns, yet it felt like a personal insult from the universe. He stood under the awning of the building that still bore his name, Sterling Steel Tower, but the brass plaque by the entrance had already been covered. A temporary sign, printed on heavy cardstock and encased in plastic, read, "Valois Dompierre Sovereign Holdings, North American Headquarters." He clutched a cardboard box to his chest. It was a standard-issue banker's box, the kind used for archiving tax receipts or firing mid-level managers. Inside, the inventory of his life was pitifully sparse. There was a stapler he had stolen from an intern 3 years ago because he liked the weight of it. There was a framed photograph of himself shaking hands with the mayor, a photo where he looked powerful, untouchable, a titan of industry. And there was a half-eaten bag of pretzels he had found in his desk drawer, a remnant of a late night spent orchestrating the very merger that had just destroyed him. His tailored suits, the Italian silk ties, the collection of vintage watches, all of it remained upstairs in the penthouse. The royal solicitor, a man named Henri Dumont, who spoke with the terrifying precision of a guillotine, had informed him just an hour ago that his personal effects were legally considered corporate assets. Since the company had paid for his wardrobe under a branding allowance, and since the company was now majority owned by the Crown of Valois, his closet belonged to the Queen. "Mr. Sterling," Dumont had said, not even looking up from his ledger, "you may keep the box. Everything else is property of the state." Benedict shivered. He was wearing a polyester windbreaker he had bought from a street vendor 2 blocks away because the doorman, his own doorman, a man named Ralph, whom he had tipped at Christmas for 5 years, had refused to let him wait in the lobby. "New policy, sir," Ralph had said, eyes fixed on the middle distance. "No unauthorized personnel in the secure zone. Her Highness's orders." Her Highness. The words tasted like bile in Benedict's throat. He looked up at the penthouse, 80 stories above. The terrace where he used to host cocktail parties, where he used to stand with a scotch in hand and look down on the ants of Manhattan, was now a fortress. The flags of Valois Dompierre, deep blue with a golden lion rampant, snapped in the wind, bold and alien against the grey sky. Two members of the Royal Guard stood at the main entrance. They were statues in crimson sashes and berets, their hands resting on the stocks of automatic rifles. They didn't look like private security. They looked like war. Passers-by gave them a wide berth, whispering, taking photos with their phones. "That's her detail," a woman whispered to her friend as they hurried past. "The princess. I heard she bought the whole building just to fire her ex-husband." "Savage," the friend laughed. "I love her." Benedict shrank into his jacket. He pulled out his phone to call a car. His Uber account was still active, but his corporate credit card had been declined. He had to link his personal debit card, the one connected to a checking account he hadn't used since college. It had a balance of $4,200. It was all he had left in the world. A black SUV pulled up to the curb. It was a beat-up Suburban with a cracked tail light and a driver who looked like he'd been awake for 3 days. "Sterling!" the driver shouted over the noise of traffic. "That's me," Benedict muttered, opening the back door. Just as he was about to slide into the worn fabric seat, a siren chirped. It was a sharp, authoritative sound that cut through the city noise. Traffic stopped. The Royal Guards at the door snapped to attention, their boots clicking on the wet pavement in perfect unison. The heavy bronze doors of the tower swung open. A motorcade began to emerge from the underground garage. First, 6 motorcycles, their riders clad in black helmets and blue uniforms, lights flashing silently. Then, 2 massive armored SUVs, bristling with antennas. And finally, the limousine. It was a custom-built beast, sleek and black, flying the royal standard on its fender. It moved with the slow, inevitable grace of a shark. Benedict froze. He couldn't help himself. He stared at the tinted windows, searching for a silhouette, a shadow, anything. The limousine slowed as it crossed the sidewalk to merge into traffic. For a fleeting second, the rear window rolled down. Just an inch, enough to let in the cool city air. Through the gap, Benedict saw her. Genevieve was sitting in the back seat. She was not looking out the window. She wasn't looking for him. She was looking at a briefing document held in her hand, her face illuminated by the soft blue glow of a tablet. She wore a coat of cream-colored cashmere and diamond earrings that caught the stray light. Her profile was sharp, regal, and utterly composed. On her wrist, resting against the document, was the watch. The old battered leather strap he had told her was trash, the watch he had tried to throw away. It looked out of place against the cashmere, yet somehow it was the most powerful thing in the car. It was a symbol of everything he had failed to see, her history, her loyalty, her endurance. She didn't turn her head. She didn't offer him a final glare of triumph or a smirk of revenge. That would have implied he still mattered to her. She simply existed, above him and beyond him. The window rolled up. The limousine accelerated, its engine a low, powerful hum that vibrated in Benedict's chest. The motorcade swept onto 57th Street, parting the sea of yellow taxis like Moses parting the Red Sea, heading toward Teterboro Airport, where a private jet waited to take the princess back to her kingdom. "Hey, buddy," the Uber driver yelled, leaning back. "You getting in or what? I got a meter running here." Benedict blinked, snapping back to his cold, wet reality. He looked at the departing taillights of his wife's convoy, now just red blurs in the rain. "I'm getting in," Benedict whispered. He climbed into the back of the ride-share. It smelled of stale coffee and pine air freshener, a stark contrast to the lavender and old money scent of the penthouse. "Where to?" the driver asked, popping a piece of gum. Benedict looked down at his box. He picked up the stapler and clicked it once, a hollow, metallic sound. "Queens?" Benedict said, his voice cracking slightly. "Astoria, 34th Avenue. The basement apartment." "You got it. Long day?" "You have no idea," Benedict sighed, leaning his head against the cold glass. As the car merged into traffic, fighting for space behind a garbage truck, Benedict saw a massive digital billboard lighting up Times Square in the distance. The bright white light cut through the gloom. Breaking news. Princess Genevieve of Valois-Dampierre departs New York. Announces $500 million Workers' Dignity Fund, financed by Sterling Steel Acquisition. The irony was suffocating. She was using his money, the money he had hoarded, the money he had worshipped, to help people like the woman she used to pretend to be. She had turned his greed into a charity. Benedict closed his eyes. He realized then that the true punishment wasn't the loss of the money. It wasn't the loss of the apartment. It was the erasure. In a month, the name Benedict Sterling would be nothing more than a cautionary tale told in business schools. He was a footnote. He was the villain in someone else's hero journey. The rideshare turned a corner, and the Sterling Tower disappeared from view, blocked by the grey skyline of a city that had already moved on. 4,000 miles away, the sun was setting over the Valois Valley. The light was golden and thick, bathing the ancient stone of the capital in a warm embrace. The arrival of the royal jet was not a quiet affair. As the wheels touched the tarmac of the private airstrip, a roar went up that drowned out the engines. Thousands of people had gathered at the perimeter fence. They held candles, flags, and signs written in French and the local dialect. They were there for the daughter of the lion. They were there for the woman who had vanished into the shadows to save her family and had returned with the strength to lead them. Genevieve stepped out onto the mobile staircase. The wind caught her hair, pulling it back from her face. She took a deep breath. The air here was different. It didn't smell of exhaust and ambition. It smelled of pine, of glacial water, of home. General Alistair Thorne stood at the bottom of the stairs, his dress uniform immaculate, his face softened by a rare emotion. He snapped a salute, but his hand lingered near his brow a moment longer than regulation required. "Welcome home, Your Highness," Alistair said, his voice thick. "The king is waiting. He is much improved. The doctors say your return has done more for him than the medicine." "Thank you, Alistair," Genevieve said, descending the stairs. She didn't walk with the tentative steps of the woman who had scrubbed floors in Manhattan. She moved with the stride of a sovereign. They drove through the winding streets of the old city. The motorcade didn't speed. It crawled, allowing the people to see her, to wave, to throw flowers onto the hood of the car. Genevieve waved back, her eyes wet with tears she had refused to shed in New York. When she reached the Palace of the Three Lions, the great oak doors were open. She walked through the Hall of Ancestors, past the portraits of kings and queens who had ruled for 6 centuries. She didn't feel small anymore. She felt like she belonged in the frame. She entered the Royal Solarium. It was a room of glass and light, overlooking the valley. King Henri VI sat in a high-backed velvet chair, a blanket draped over his legs. He looked frail, his skin like parchment, but his eyes, blue and piercing, identical to hers, were sharp. "Genevieve," he rasped, lifting a trembling hand. She crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt beside him, taking his hand in hers. It was cold, but strong. "I'm back, father," she whispered, kissing his knuckles. "I'm home." "The American," the king said, his voice a dry rustle. "Alistair told me what happened. He did not know who you were." "He saw only what he wanted to see," Genevieve said softly. She touched the leather watch on her wrist. "He saw a servant. He never looked close enough to see the queen." The king squeezed her hand. "And now?" "Now," Genevieve said, standing up. She looked out over the balcony, where the lights of her city were beginning to twinkle in the twilight. "Now, he is a memory, a lesson." She turned back to her father. "He taught me that silence is not weakness, father. It is a weapon. And he taught me that a crown isn't made of gold. It's made of what you are willing to endure to keep it." The king smiled, closing his eyes in peace. "Then his service to the crown is finished. Long live the princess." Genevieve walked to the balcony doors. She pushed them open and stepped out into the cool night air. Below her, the city was alive. She took her phone, the secure device Benedict had given her to track her movements, out of her pocket. It buzzed with a notification. An email from the board of directors of Sterling Steel, begging for a meeting to discuss her vision for the future. She didn't open it. She powered the phone down. She walked to the edge of the stone railing and dropped the device. It fell, tumbling down into the deep ravine that surrounded the palace, disappearing into the darkness. Genevieve took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the air of her kingdom. The masquerade was over. The waitress was gone. The quiet wife was dead. The sovereign had returned. From the cold, rain-soaked streets of Queens to the golden sunset of a European throne, Genevieve's journey proves one undeniable truth. True power doesn't need to shout to be heard. Benedict Sterling learned the hard way that when you treat people like they are nothing, you might just be digging your own grave. He lost his fortune, his company, and his dignity, all because he couldn't see the value in the person standing right in front of him. But what do you think? Was taking his company too far? Or was it the perfect justice for a man who valued money over humanity? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. If you loved this story of secret royalty and ultimate revenge, please hit that like button. It helps the channel so much. Share this video with a friend who needs a reminder that the underdog can win. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss our next story. Thanks for watching, and remember, be kind to everyone you meet. You never know who is secretly wearing a crown.